Hey, welcome everybody. This is Matt Stone with Coldwell Banker Realty and First North Real Estate Group. And today we are talking about step number 3 or tip number 3 in my For Sale by Owner marketing toolkit. Today we're going to be talking about assembling all of the legal documents, all of the required documents that you're going to need in a real estate transaction or the sale of your home. So the sale of your home is a really big and a really complex transaction. Probably the biggest transaction that most people are going to make. And so no surprise, there are a lot of legal documents, necessary documents that either the state or your city or your county are going to require as part of the transaction. Now, some of these forms you don't actually have to use them. But the reason that they exist is because a problem arose at some point in the history of real estate. And so either the Division of Real Estate or the state or somebody created these documents to protect people and to make the transaction run a little bit smoother for everybody. Now, with these documents, not only is it important that you have them, and in some cases you're going to need to provide them to the buyers of your home, but the real key is going to be in understanding them. That's going to be the thing that gives you more negotiating power, and it's also going to be the thing that keeps you safe and protects you in the real estate transaction. Okay, so let's jump right in with first and foremost, we have the real estate purchase contract. Now here in Utah, this is about a 6-page contract, and it outlines all of the details of the sale between the buyer and the seller. Now, understanding this is critical and because it's going to protect or give advantages maybe to one party or the other. And this is where a lot of the negotiation is going to come back and forth between buyers and sellers over the points that are inside of the REPC. As you can see here on the screen, it outlines things like, of course, what is the property, what things are going to be included within the sale, what things are going to be excluded perhaps, water service, the important things, of course, the price, how is the money going to be there, how's it going to be divided up between maybe earnest money, other deposits, and monies that are given over at settlement and closing. All the details here about prorations and assessments, fees and costs and who's obligated to pay those things, utility services. If there is any agency or representation involved, it outlines who that is. Also talks about things like with title companies, title insurance, also the seller disclosures. These are documents that we're going to talk about today that are going to be required for the seller to provide over to the buyer, and at what point those are going to be provided. The conditions of the purchase for the buyer, things like with due diligence and inspections, appraisal conditions, things like that, financing conditions, other earnest monies. It talks about if there's addenda that are included, home warranties, pre-settlement walkthroughs, additional signers, completion of the contracts, mediation, attorney's fees, notices, insurance, things like that. All the things that are pertinent to the sale of the contract or the sale of the home are going to be in this contract. And then finally, at the end of the document here, it outlines the deadlines. The deadlines for the disclosures, the due diligence deadline, the financing and appraisal deadline, and the settlement deadline. Now, most of these deadlines are for the buyer to perform, but a couple of them, mainly the disclosures, are things that the seller, you the seller of the home, have to provide within the deadline. Now, this is a legally binding contract, and so you have to perform according to the terms that you've agreed to and signed off on this real estate purchase contract. And if you don't, you can be sued. You can be taken to court for failure to perform. So, very important document, very important to understand, go over it, and again, use it to your advantage if possible in the negotiation of the sale of your home. So I mentioned, with the real estate purchase contract, there are addendums. There are things like solar panel addendums. So if you have solar panels on your roof, you have to provide information about that. Who owns it? Is it leased? When was it installed? Who installed it? Those types of things. And there are many, many other addenda that have been created that weren't addressed in the original REPC. So you'll want to make sure that you're aware of any of those that you might need to include in the transaction of the sale of your home. Another disclosure that you may have to provide is if your home was built prior to 1978. There is a lead-based paint disclosure where you as the seller of the home have to disclose if you know there's lead-based paint in the home. Even if it's under 4 layers of wallpaper, you have to disclose that. You have to disclose if you know that there is, you know that there isn't, if you're unsure, and you give that document over to the buyer so that they understand what they're buying, and you both acknowledge to each other that you've received that, and you've received that document. All right, another necessary document that you will have to provide to the buyer is the seller property condition disclosure. All right, this is a multi-page document. This is 7 pages for the one that we have here in Utah, and this is where you have to disclose everything that you know about the property. And this is not just things that you know while you owned it, but these are things that you knew of, maybe that you were told from the previous owner, or maybe that when you bought the house, it was disclosed to you about the property. As you can see on the screen here, it goes over a lot of things: ownership, additional models, the use of the property, the roof, natural gas, the water, the septic, the heating and the cooling, equipment, appliances, fireplaces. Is there any termites or dry rot or pests that you know about? Structural items, things with the soil, electrical, mold, other moisture issues, hazardous conditions, things that you know about the homeowners association, public infrastructure districts. Are there new light posts going in that you know about, that that the buyer is going to want to know about? Insurance, energy efficiency, solar panel systems. Basically everything that you know about the house, you have to truthfully disclose in this document. And again, it's important that you are very truthful and honest about this, because again, if you lie about it, if it can be proven that you knew about something and you didn't disclose it, you can be held financially liable for not disclosing that information. All right, another form that you as the seller must provide, at least here in Utah, to the buyer is the buyer due diligence checklist. Now, this is just to protect the buyer. It doesn't protect the seller in any way. But as you can see here on the screen, it talks about building and code zoning compliance, rental of the property, hazardous waste, radon gas, surveying and staking, homeowners insurance, title, physical condition, square footage, water, utilities, things like that. These are all items to advise the buyer about their rights and their responsibility, maybe to investigate or to know more about the situation with this property or the neighborhood or the city. So you have to provide this form to the buyer, and then they will acknowledge that they've received it, and in that process, hopefully they've read through it and understand it as well. All right, another form that you have to provide to the buyer is the wire fraud alert disclosure. Now, wire fraud is prevalent everywhere in the world. Certainly Utah is no different. Wire fraud happens every single day. You'd think that everybody would be wise to it, but as much as people think they're not going to be victims of it, every day somebody is a victim of it. I've heard story after story after story about somebody who wired their earnest money or wired their down payment to somebody who said, sent them wiring instructions. This is where you send your money. This is where you send your $20,000 earnest money. This is where you send your, $80,000 down payment. The way they get that information, really not even important. The important thing is that you need to be aware and alert that this thing is happening every day. The crooks out there are targeting buyers in these transactions, sellers too, but mostly buyers, and trying to get their money. So this disclosure alerts them to the possibility of it and gives them tactics so that they can protect themselves from being a victim of wire fraud. All right, another document that you need to provide the buyer is when you receive the earnest money as part of the deal or the part of the real estate purchase contract, you have to send them a receipt that you did receive that earnest money, and it needs to be done within a specific amount of time. All right, also another document that you have to provide is the commitment for title insurance. Now, more than likely, when you sell your home, you are going to be working with a title company, and they will be able to provide this document as well as a few others that we're going to talk about. The important thing here is that your title company really needs to know what the deadline is for disclosing these documents, for sending these documents over to the buyer. Now, sometimes it's not a deal breaker, but if you don't get these documents over in the right amount of time, the buyer then can use your negligence as some leverage, maybe to get something else out of the deal that you weren't planning on giving otherwise. You may also be required to provide a plot survey or the planning map of your area as part of the deal. This is also something that the title company should be able to provide for you. And then finally, you may also need to provide the CC&Rs as well as HOA documents as part of the disclosures that you, the seller, must provide to the buyer. Now, there may be some other forms that you need to provide that are specific to where you live or the neighborhood you live in, the HOA you live in. So you'll want to investigate that and make sure that you're providing everything necessary. And again, I spoke about this at the beginning. The key to these documents as a seller is really understanding them. Not only are they going to give you a little bit more negotiating power as you're trying to sell your house on your terms and getting the most money for your home, but it's also going to protect you legally throughout the transaction. So I hope you got some value out of this. At the very least, I hope you are aware of some of the forms that you may not have been aware of that you're going to need in selling your home. In the next video, we're going to talk about step number 4, which is going to be effectively marketing your home once it's up for sale. Again, this goes back to the difference between just putting your house up for sale, describing the condition of your home, and selling, verb, action, selling your home. We're going to talk about the strategies and the things that can best get your home seen on the market and appeal to the best buyers possible.